Oh, howdy all, grab yourselves a beer, it is time for some Path of Exile discussion. Today, what I wanted to talk about is both the upcoming changes to cluster jewels post that was made on the official Path of Exile website today, but also the sort of storm that came up around this particular Reddit meme. So what this meme is, it's an image that's been taken from one of the crafting simulation programs of how difficult it would be to roll a specific combination of cluster jewel nodes. So this is on a fire damage large cluster jewel, and they've deliberately chosen fire damage because it has some of the rarest mods available on it: Master of Fire and Corrosive Elements. I will say that there is no practical reason anyone would craft this. The reason behind that is that Corrosive Elements and Master of Fire do not synergize at all. You want one of these, you don't want both of them simultaneously. That's because they both provide sources of fire exposure, and fire exposure from two different sources doesn't stack. So essentially, you'd have the benefits of one of them, but not the benefits of both. Anyways, leaving that aside, my reason for talking about this meme isn't to tear shreds through it. I think that there's a couple of interesting points that come out of it. Firstly, any experienced crafter will tell you that if you want to get a rare item that has 3 specific, very, very, very rare affixes on them. So what this weight column means, it's also available on PoEDB, a data mining website. This weight is basically a measure of how difficult it is to roll a specific mod. The lower the weight is, the rarer. I like to think of it as each of the various mods has this number of raffle entries. So Vengeful Commander has 475 entries in the raffle. Sadist has 89. Corrosive Elements 30. Doriani's Lesson 89. And so on and so forth. Then down to some of these non-notable ones. So passive skills grant attack speed and cast speed with fire skills. 250 for the top tier. And additionally, this level column indicates the minimum level of a cluster jewel for that specific mod to roll. So if your cluster jewel is level 78, then the weighting on this bottom roll of small passives grant 3% attack and cast speed with fire skills, that's actually decreased to 0 because your item level of your jewel is not high enough to roll it. So with a large cluster jewel that's fire-based, you have all of these mods, and you also have this pool of mods down the bottom. In 3.10, these mods, which are mostly underwhelming, mostly not all that powerful, these mods were considerably rarer than they are now. Additionally, the mediocre passive nodes, the mediocre notable nodes, were slightly more common than they are now. And the extraordinary ones, such as Master of Fire, these were much more common in 3.10. So in 3.10, the problem, and this is sort of outlined in the official announcement, in the Delirium League, it was too easy to get a perfect cluster jewel. What this meant in practice was that a section of the player base worked out how to craft cluster jewels perfectly. They solved the problem, and they would just use fossils to create the very best possible outcome. They'd basically buy up all of the cluster jewel bases that were available, that were relevant to their crafting project, and then they would roll a perfect cluster jewel from it. So that is no longer going to be the case. Oh well, that's no longer the case because it's now very difficult to roll a perfect cluster jewel. In fact, if you're only using Chaos Orbs, it is effectively impossible to roll this combination of mods. Leave aside that whilst you would not want this combination of mods, Corrosive Elements, Master of Fire, if we replace Master of Fire with Sadist instead, the argument that's made here still applies. Sadist is 3 times as likely to roll, and that means that you're looking at 1 in 33 million to hit this combination with Chaos Orbs. So, anyone that looks at weightings this low and that is an experienced crafter immediately says, okay, I need 3 perfect mods, I need to be doing bestiary crafting for this. They would not even consider pulling out the Chaos Orbs for this. They'd be going straight to, okay, what combination? Well, what am I going to do here? I'm going to transmute it, make it magic, then I'm going to spam alterations until I get a prefix from here as well as one of the suffixes that I want. And then once I've got that, I'm going to, which will take a while, I'm going to use beast crafting to imprint the item. Imprints allow you to roll back a failed craft, and they can only be done in the current state of the game on magic items. So you would imprint it once it had, say, Master of Fire plus 2 added passives of jewel sockets, and then you would hit it with a Regal Orb. And this Regal Orb would then dictate where you go next. If you hit something desirable, then winner winner, a chicken dinner. If you don't hit something desirable, then at that point you go, okay, no good, I'm going to revert back to the imprint. I'm going to buy another imprint beast, and I'm going to repeat the process. So you're going to keep imprint regaling until you get the right combination. Once you've done that, you will then say, okay, that's what we wanted. Now we're going to make a cost-benefit analysis on exalting it. And actually, the very best possibility you could have would be for your magic version of your item to be corrosive elements plus Doriani's lesson. Then for your regal, your imprint regals to eventually hit Master of Fire. At that point, no question, you exalt it, because if you hit the jewel sockets, you've made something that may even be meritier in the current league. If you don't, well, you're down on exalt, but you came close. You might even be able to salvage the item with an annulment orb. So that's how an experienced crafter would go about this. And I think it's worth pointing out to people that aren't familiar with this process that using Chaos Orbs to reroll mods on items is pretty much a sucker's trap. There are exceptions, but generally speaking, your Chaos Orbs are not for crafting items. They are for paying Zana's bench fees. That's something to keep in mind, because they're just so much better for that purpose than they are for rolling items. All of that discussed, that means that essentially this meme was largely incorrect, but it's still possible that you could make a case that the probability of rolling a perfect cluster jewel was too low. What GGG have done though is interesting, in that they've actually made some changes that make rolling a genuinely perfect cluster jewel even harder than it is in this meme. And this is genuinely harder too. It's not something that is only hard because of the misconceptions here. However, they're raising the power of all of the cluster jewels that exist, particularly the ones that are at the very bottom in power-wise. So, at the moment they feel that cluster jewels are too weak unless they're close to perfect. I'm not necessarily sure that I agree, but anyways, let's just roll with it. Because of the potential power of these jewels, we want it to be challenging to roll a perfect jewel. However, large and medium cluster jewels are currently too expensive to get into even a medium state where it's worth using them over existing passives on the tree. And it's worth pointing out here that the cost of allocating a cluster jewel on your tree is 2 travel nodes plus the one that your large cluster jewel goes into. Then all of those points that you take that are mediocre on the large jewel, plus the 2 jewel sockets to then get the medium ones. For most builds, the medium ones are where the power is. And then you'll then want to allocate small ones as well. So the change that they're making is that medium and large cluster jewels will be changed. So large cluster jewels will now have an entire additional mod on them that causes them to have two of their sockets become jewel sockets. This is over and above every mod that's on them. Medium cluster jewels will have a weaker version of this, where they're going to keep their existing 4 spaces to roll mods, but they're also always going to have a jewel mod. There are some very corner cases where this is weaker, but those are very few and far between. Generally speaking, this is a huge power increase to cluster jewels, and I think it's interesting that they're actually making it harder to roll the perfect ones, but the nearly perfect ones are going to be better than the current perfect ones, and the nearly perfect ones will be very rollable. I think that this is an interesting new vision for cluster jewels. So cluster jewels now, in 3.10, assuming that you weren't playing a build that stacked them, they were a bit better than the rest of the tree. They're going to be much better. This is going to mean that a lot of builds are going to want to include 2 entire cluster jewel clusters. And that means that larger sections of the passive tree are going to go unused. So that's going to be one change that's going to come out of this for gameplay. The other change that I think is important is that because they're going to be very, very, very hard, in fact, the perfect ones are going to be almost non-existent in a league, this is going to mean that you're going to upgrade your cluster jewels much more often. I'm a big fan of this. Cluster jewels are an item slot after all, and upgrading items is something that should not stop when you hit, level 83 or 84. Ideally, you'll continually upgrade your items as you keep playing. Those upgrades will become less and less meaningful, and they'll become further and further apart, but there'll still be something that you could conceivably have in sight as a next goal. And I'm hoping that what this does is it causes a situation where players have got an initial set of cluster jewels that they might socket when they're, say, level 80 or so, that they'll get there and they'll start out that section of their tree. Then they'll run a bunch of maps, amass a bit more currency, and then say, you know what, the weakest link in my cluster is the left medium cluster jewel. I want to upgrade that. They'll seek out an upgrade for it. It'll be significant, the character will be more powerful. Then after that, they're going to say, you know what, the weakest link is now the right small cluster jewel. And then they'll look for an upgrade to that. They'll find one, and then bang, now the character's running around perhaps with an additional 24 points of chaos resist. Then they'll go, all right, you know what, I'm going to upgrade the large cluster jewel next. And then they'll go from one that has, say, let's say that you were running one with disorienting display, prismatic heart, and a garbage mod. So disorienting display, prismatic heart, and 2 jewel sockets, and say added passives grant 2% cast speed. So that's what you've got. Then you think, you know what, I want to upgrade this, and so they look for one that has Master of Fire on it. But they can't afford one that's got Master of Fire and Doriani's Lesson at the same time. So they say, okay, I'll go with Master of Fire plus a couple other good mods. Prismatic Heart is just okay, and one of these suffixes. And then later on they'll say, you know what, I can exalt this. And they do. And that's another upgrade. And so on and so forth. Eventually maybe they can get something that is almost perfect for their build. The other thing that's really noticeable is that harvest crafting is incredibly powerful with the cluster jewel system. It's something a lot of people haven't really caught on to yet. That, for instance, if you have a look at the large cluster jewels for fire damage on hits again, you'll notice that there is only one life mod that they can roll in the notable section, and not many life rolls that are available down here in the sort of augment section down below. So this is something that can cause a lot of power. Alternately, if you've got a cluster jewel, you're happy with your prefix with your notables, then you get the opportunity to say surgically exalt something. You might be able to surgically exalt lightning resistance, which may be considerable if you're taking a lot of the points in that area. So yeah, there's a lot of potential for these to be played around with now. If you're not using harvest crafting on them, definitely give it a shot, because the ability to pinpoint a specific mod category is really powerful. So, bit of a quick summary. This post was probably made in good faith, but is somewhat wrong. That actually this hypothetical cluster jewel, despite not being a combination of mods anyone would want, there are similar combinations that would be similar in terms of their probability of hitting them with a Chaos Orb, but no one who is an experienced crafter, no one who is able to amass the wealth to craft this item will try to Chaos Spam it. They would use different strategies, and it's a problem that large sections of the player base don't recognize that is the case. You know, it's a problem that the power of bestiary crafting is so hidden that people think, oh, the correct way to craft something with 3 brilliant mods is to go straight to crafting it with Chaos Orbs. However, all that said, the changes look interesting. They're going to be an increase in character power, and hopefully there's enough. Hopefully, there is going to be enough content to do with them, because we haven't really seen how Delirium content plays out now that the overpowered builds of last league are gone. So, you've got things like tier 16, 100% Delirious maps, things like Simulacrum Wave 20, that very few people beat without using one of the broken builds. Well, those broken builds are dead now, and that content remains in-game and remains very, very challenging. So there is stuff to do with this new power. I'm looking forward to seeing how it plays out. And whilst I was very apprehensive when Reddit was calling for nerfs to Cluster Jewel Rarity, I'm actually pretty happy with what's being done. Anyways, if you've got any comments or questions, fire away below. Otherwise, I'm going to leave it there. I hope you have a good one.